We live in a time when the greatest threat doesn't come from evildoers, but from fools. Not from those who plan evil with care, but from those who act without thought. They are many, loud, confident, and dangerous. Because their ignorance isn't passive, it's active. And more than that, it's contagious, impulsive, and socially accepted. Stupidity has lost its shame. And now it threatens society's very foundations. Not by knowing little, but by believing they know too much. The problem isn't just that this generation ignores facts. It's that it ignores its own ignorance. It doesn't grasp how little it knows. And that is fatal. If once the fool remained silent out of respect or insecurity, today he feels like a protagonist and acts as if he's a reference. He believes spontaneity is worth more than correctness. He believes opinion matters more than reasoning. Knowledge has become a burden, not a virtue. Who reads a lot is seen as arrogant. Who studies is accused of indoctrination. Reason is replaced by guessing, reflection by impulse, wisdom by charisma. And in this inverted scenario, ignorance becomes trendy, and questioning is punished. This generation doesn't pose a threat by being stupid in the classic sense. They have access to information. They possess tools, opportunities, resources, but lack filtering, connecting, interpreting. They have an infinite library in their hands and choose memes. They have access to science and choose conspiracy. They have free speech and use it to spread noise. It's a collective decision for superficiality. The greatest danger lies in the combination of numbers, influence, and conviction. The more fools there are, the stronger they support one another. The more followers they gain, the more convinced they become. And the more convinced they are, the less willing they are to listen. This amplified ignorance becomes structure. It begins to set the terms of debate, policies, collective decisions. Society starts orbiting impulses, not ideas. Democracy collapses quietly under its own weight. Organized stupidity is more powerful than isolated malice. The fool acts in groups, without reflection, without restraint. He shares, replicates, reinforces, without thinking. And so his mistakes multiply rapidly. A malicious actor can be confronted with reason, but the convinced fool will not accept correction. He does not debate. He imposes. And his strength is in blind repetition. Meanwhile, the conscious ones retreat. They become silent, isolated, resigned. With every toxic debate, they lose the will to participate. With every absurd viral, they feel more alienated. And thus, seats of power are occupied. Not by those who are prepared, but by those bold enough to speak nonsense. And ignorance now doesn't just threaten. It rules, legislates, determines what is normal. Civilization doesn't collapse only through wars or economic crises. It also collapses through a saturation of stupidity. When reason loses value, chaos settles in. When merit is replaced by shouting, the end is only a question of time. Stupidity, when protected by pride and numbers, becomes system, and a foolish system is harder to dismantle than a tyrant, because it has no face, no plan, only volume. And volume, today, is power. Modern stupidity doesn't act alone. It connects. It finds peers online, forms groups, becomes a movement. It's no longer an individual issue. It's a collective force. And the larger the group, the less accountability is felt. It spreads through comments, forums, videos, and chain messages. It gains momentum via repetition, algorithms, and the illusion of majority. What started as isolated misinformation becomes popular opinion. That's how ignorance gains social status. This form of stupidity is immune to criticism. It is shielded against any correction. Those who try to argue are labeled arrogant, elitist, or woke. It responds with offense, mockery, cancellation. Because it doesn't want to listen, it wants to win. And winning for it means silencing the other. It protects its beliefs at all costs, even when they collapse under logic. The threat isn't just what this generation thinks. It's how they act based on those thoughts. They vote, cancel, consume, and influence. They shape public language. They define what is normal or acceptable, and shift the public conversation toward the absurd. What was once reasonable now seems radical, and irrationality becomes the new center. We now live by the logic of, if it feels true, it is. If something goes viral, it's treated like fact. Fact-checking is now optional, or seen as suspicious. People choose to believe what reinforces their emotions and reject anything that challenges them. That's not ignorance. It's unconscious self-preservation. The more emotional the message, the more powerful it becomes. Because truth today is what comforts, not what is proven. Organized stupidity has its own aesthetics, language, and narratives. It uses emojis, slogans, and memes. It doesn't argue. It performs. It doesn't need to explain, just entertain. And that attracts, entertains, converts. The language of reason is slow, dense, sometimes uncomfortable. But the language of stupidity is fast, light, seductive, and for that reason, it wins easily. This generation doesn't distinguish between stage and forum. Everything becomes a performance. Political debates, health crises, social disasters, all become entertainment. The seriousness of events is diluted in meme culture, and with that, urgency is lost. Everything becomes a joke. Everything is trivialized. Risk is dismissed as drama or overreaction. The logic of stupidity is binary. Us versus them. If you think differently, you're an enemy. If you question, you're a traitor. If you study, you've been brainwashed. This tribal mentality kills dialogue. It builds trenches instead of bridges and destroys any attempt at collective construction. Debate becomes a war of versions, not ideas. The danger of this generation is not just in their existence, but in their reach. They hold voting power, consumer power, social engagement, and influence. They occupy spaces once reserved for analysis and slowly push society toward irrationality. They don't just ignore knowledge, they attack it. They don't want to learn, they want to rule by emotion. And when emotion becomes law, reason becomes exception, and collapse becomes a matter of time. The anti-vaccine movement is one of the clearest examples. Despite evidence, data, studies, and decades of science, millions chose to believe homemade videos and WhatsApp rumors. Influencers with no medical training became trusted sources. Experts were treated as public enemies. Health turned into an opinion, and death became an avoidable outcome, made inevitable by collective stubbornness. Ignorance went viral and killed more than the virus. Conspiracy theories spread like facts. Flat Earth, New World Order, microchips in vaccines. The absurd doesn't repel, it attracts, because it offers simple answers for a complex world. And the simple, even when false, soothes. Truth demands effort. A well-told lie only needs a click. And the stupidest generation always chooses the easy lie. Social media is the fuel for this phenomenon. Algorithms reward engagement, not accuracy. And what grabs attention rarely educates. It shocks, polarizes, inflames. As a result, the loudest idiots gain reach. Doubt is punished with silence, and confident stupidity is rewarded with virality. Ignorance has become a strategy for influence. The Dunning-Kruger Effect plays out daily. People with surface-level knowledge feel like experts because they watched a video or listened to a podcast. They don't know enough to realize how little they know. and that gap is filled with arrogance. The less they know, the more certain they are. And that unearned confidence spreads like wildfire, especially in politics and public discourse. Contempt for science has become an ideological badge. What should unite, method, logic, testing, has been framed as a political stance. Denying evidence is seen as bravery. Rejecting facts is now a freedom act. And in this new moral order, those who think are labeled manipulators. Truth has become a matter of taste, and knowledge an enemy to be silenced. The collapse of public debate is visible everywhere. Conversations became emotional brawls. No one listens. They wait for their turn to yell. Arguments are replaced by insults, sarcasm, and emojis. There's no construction, only destruction. The more aggressive someone is, the more applause they get. Logic has given way to performance, and dialogue has become a battlefield of egos. Thinkers like Dietrich Bonhoeffer warned us, stupidity is more dangerous than evil, because the stupid truly believe they're doing good. They don't act out of cruelty, but blind conviction, and no argument can penetrate that bubble. They don't listen, they repeat. And the more collective they become, the more untouchable they are. The danger lies not just in what they think, but in what they drag with them. Others, like Tom Nichols, describe the death of expertise. We live in a time where everyone thinks they know everything. Intellectual authority has collapsed. Now, anyone with a camera and a strong tone becomes an influencer. Experts are distrusted. Hot takes replaced informed analysis. And this isn't just uncomfortable. It's the perfect breeding ground for the collapse of rational thought. Rationality is being pushed to the margins. It hasn't disappeared, but it's lost status. Thinking before speaking is seen as weakness. Doubt is interpreted as indecision. Argument is labeled as being annoying. Thoughtful silence is mistaken for fear. Intelligence is being discredited by public exhaustion, and the price is being paid everywhere. Culture has been dumbed down. Complex works are dismissed as too hard. Dense debates don't attract an audience. Books are decoration. Philosophy is mocked. Science is ideologically biased. Everything that requires time, effort, and depth is discarded. Society now prefers shortcuts. Public discourse is in ruins. Controversies have replaced discussion. Catchphrases took the place of reasoning. The other person is no longer a participant. They're an opponent. And that kills any chance of shared construction. Without listening, there's no consensus. Without consensus, there's no civility. And without civility, everything becomes symbolic war. Political rhetoric has also collapsed. Slogans beat planning. Sound bites beat governance. Marketing beats vision. Leaders are chosen for virality, not capacity. Media-savvy ignorance is a strategy for power. Populism found fertile ground in articulate stupidity. Policy decisions now follow likes, not data. The attention economy made stupidity valuable. The more provocative, the more visibility. The more shallow, the more accessible. The more simplistic, the more digestible. Digital platforms don't demand quality, they demand attention. And attention is captured through rage and ignorance. That makes misinformation profitable. Education reflects this decay. Teachers are challenged by students who saw it on TikTok. Schools are pressured to entertain, not educate. Content must be light, fun, quick. Depth has been reduced to bite-sized bits. Attention spans are collapsing. Classrooms become ideological battlegrounds. Students don't learn, they choose what to believe. Science is suffering too. Studies are dismissed as too complicated. Technical language is called pretentious. The scientific method is equated to guesswork. Researchers must justify their existence to avoid attack. Ignorance demands to be treated as a valid opinion, and when everything is an opinion, nothing is true. Truth becomes quicksand. In the long run, the most dangerous consequence is the erosion of collective trust. When everything can be emotionally questioned, nothing is solid enough to sustain a society. We lose common ground. Without shared truth, everyone lives inside their own fiction. Lies are elevated to versions. Ignorance becomes a lifestyle, and civilization begins to collapse, quietly but fast. How many times have you stayed quiet after hearing something absurd? How often did you choose silence to avoid conflict? Not because you agreed, but because it felt pointless. Because arguing became exhausting. Because ignorance felt like a wall, and you were tired of banging your head against it. But every time you go silent, it grows and replaces reason effortlessly. Have you ever felt like a stranger just for thinking differently? As if reasoning were a social offense? As if lucidity were arrogance? We now live in a time when stupidity feels more relatable, and intelligence has to disguise itself not to upset people. Being sensible is treated like being snobbish, and the more you think, the more isolated you feel. It's the loneliness of those who still think. How many times have you started writing and gave up halfway through because you knew the algorithm wouldn't show it, or that the comments would be hate-filled, or that no one would understand or care? The fear of sounding too complex silences many. Culture demands simple answers to complex problems, and those who insist on thinking seem out of touch. But thinking was never about fitting in. Have you ever felt ashamed to use a word others wouldn't understand? Have you ever avoided showing knowledge to not seem arrogant? Have you ever pretended not to know, just to blend in? That's the self-censorship of intelligence, a silent pact with mediocrity. To survive, many hide their best asset, the ability to analyze, to go deep, to question constructively. And the world loses every time a mind goes quiet. The intelligent today live in constant conflict. They watch absurdity grow but feel that fighting it is useless. They know they could contribute, but doubt the impact. They hesitate, withdraw, burn out. Meanwhile, the ignorant push forward. They don't doubt, don't pause, don't filter. And that difference is all stupidity needs to win, because it fills every space intelligence gives up. Maybe you think deep thinking changes nothing. That reflection has no real effect. But what keeps a society healthy isn't shouting. It's discernment, it's filtering, it's careful questioning. And if you don't uphold that, who will? The world doesn't improve with noise. It improves when someone dares to hold a lucid silence, even when no one is listening. The real question is, how long will you stay silent? How long will you let the fools dominate the room? How long will you pretend it's not worth it? It is worth it. Because the consequence of silence is collective collapse. If you think, you have a responsibility. And it starts with one decision. Speak or stay silent. Resist or surrender. The silence of the intelligent isn't neutral. It's corrosive. It creates the illusion that no one else is thinking, that everyone agrees with the absurd, that the loudest voices represent the majority. And when this illusion settles in, reason becomes the exception. Mistakes go unchallenged, lies go unchecked, and falsehood becomes just another version of the truth. This constant omission creates a cultural vacuum. Where there should be analysis, guesswork takes over. Where there should be debate, shouting takes root. Where there should be doubt, blind certainty settles in. Opinions become authority, shallowness becomes the norm, and depth is treated as elitism. Stupidity becomes the social standard. The highest cost is the normalization of stupidity. It stops being the exception and becomes the rule. People stop being outraged. They start laughing, tolerating, adapting. Mediocrity becomes a comfort zone, and over time, new generations grow up shaped by it. They grow believing that thinking is unnecessary, that feeling is enough. This collective resignation creates a vicious cycle. Younger people no longer have reference points for critical thinking. They don't see the value in study, reflection, well-placed doubt. They mirror shallow but charismatic figures. Examples shape more than speeches. And if the example is stupidity in performance, that's what gets replicated. And what was once crisis becomes culture. Institutions suffer too. Schools become ideological war zones. Universities are discredited. The press is framed as the enemy. Science becomes a threat to common sense. Ignorance infiltrates councils, parliaments, ministries. Fundamental decisions are made by the unqualified, or worse, by those who despise qualification. Even democracy begins to crack. It depends on dialogue, listening, and plurality. And none of that survives in an environment dominated by militant stupidity. Votes are cast for memes. Policies are shaped by emotions. Leaders are chosen for noise, not thought. Reason loses ground to populism. Politics becomes an extension of the algorithm. Stupidity no longer threatens. It governs. The social environment turns hostile to intelligence. Those who think are attacked. Those who study are isolated. Those who question are labeled. Public life empties of real thinking. All that's left is noise, cliches, rants, slogans. Dialogue is replaced with narrative battles. Coexistence turns into an arena of ignorant egos. In the end, those who still think feel exiled, as if there's no place left for clarity, as if intelligence had become useless. And many slowly internalize that discouragement. They retreat, go silent, give up. And when the lucid fall silent, collapse becomes inevitable. Because there's no one left at the wheel. And stupidity finally reigns. This isn't about defeating the stupid. That was never the point. Organized ignorance isn't beaten with strength, but faced with clarity. Resisting doesn't mean destroying the other. It means not losing yourself. It means maintaining integrity in the face of chaos. Not becoming a caricature of what you fight. Because if the fool acts on impulse, the lucid act with purpose. And purpose, unlike impulse, can carry you through. Intelligence doesn't need to win. It just needs to endure. Breathing, writing, teaching, resisting. If you've made it this far, you're already part of that. The world may be loud, but clarity still echoes. Don't let it die in you. Because if intelligence goes silent, collapse isn't a threat anymore. It's just the next step.